It's week 7 of the NFL season, and here are my predictions for this week. But first, how did I do last week? In week 6, I went 11-3 in my predictions. Starting out the week on Thursday Night Football, we have the 3-3 Broncos versus the 2-4 Saints. Last week, the Broncos lost 23-16 to the Chargers. In that game, Bo Nix went 19 of 33 with 216 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception, and had 61 yards rushing. Then for the Saints, they lost 51-27 against the Buccaneers. And Spencer Rattler in his first career game went 22 of 40, 243 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Alvin Kamara had 40 yards rushing and a touchdown, while also having 5 receptions for 24 yards. For this week's game, Pat Surtain II is questionable for the Broncos. Alvin Kamara and Rashid Shaheed are both questionable for the Saints, and Derek Carr is still doubtful. And the Saints have also lost 4 games in a row. So with all those injuries to the Saints, I have the Broncos winning. Now moving over to Sunday, in the last London game of the season, the 1-5 Patriots versus the 1-5 Jaguars. Last week the Patriots lost 41-21 against the Texans, and in that game Drake May had his first career start, and he had a pretty good game. He went 20 of 33, 243 yards, 3 touchdowns, but he had 2 interceptions. And he led the team in rushing yards with 38. And Demario Douglas led the team with 6 receptions, 92 yards, and a touchdown. Then for the Jaguars, they lost 35-16 versus the Bears in London last week. Trevor Lawrence had 234 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Evan Ingram returned to the lineup last week and had 10 receptions for 102 yards. And as a team, they only had 68 yards running. But for this week, Travis Etienne Jr. is doubtful. The Patriots offense looked a lot better with Drake May in there. They had over 200 yards passing for the first time this season, and I have the Patriots winning. Then we have the 2-4 Bengals versus the 1-5 Browns. The Bengals got their second win of the year with a 17-7 win over the Giants. Joe Burrow went 19 of 24 with 208 yards, while also having 55 yards rushing and a touchdown. And T. Higgins led the team in receiving with 7 receptions for 77 yards. Then for the Browns, they lost 20-16 to the Eagles. In this game, Deshaun Watson went 16 of 23, 168 yards, and he was sacked 5 more times. And on the season, he's already been sacked 31 times, which is by far the most. Then on defense, Myles Garrett had a blocked field goal, and Rodney McLeod returned it for a touchdown, and he now has 2 touchdowns on the season, which is tied for the most on the entire team. Deshaun Watson did play a lot better in this game. In the second half, at one point, he was 11 of 11. But the good news for the Browns is they're getting Nick Chubb back this week. But they did lose their backup center to a broken fibula. And their starting center, Ethan Posick, is still questionable for this game. But also, Joe Burrow in his career versus the Browns is 1-5. And he is 0-3 at the Browns Stadium. The Browns also traded away Amari Cooper to the Buffalo Bills for a 3rd-round pick. And I have the Bengals winning. Then we have the 1-4 Titans versus the 4-2 Bills. The Titans are coming off a very close loss, 20-17, against the Colts. In this game, Will Levis had 95 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Tony Pollard had 93 yards and a touchdown, and DeAndre Hopkins had 4 receptions for 54 yards. Then for the Bills, they beat the Jets 23-20 on Monday Night Football. Josh Allen went 19 of 25 for 215 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he had a rushing touchdown. Then Ray Davis led them in both receiving and rushing. He had 97 yards rushing and 55 yards receiving. Then they got a new number 1 wide receiver with Amari Cooper. The Bills are a much better team, and I have the Bills winning. Then we have the 5-1 Texans versus the 4-2 Packers. This is a great matchup between 2 great teams. In the Texans' win over the Patriots, C.J. Stroud went 20 of 31, 192 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. Joe Mixon had 102 yards and a touchdown, and Stephon Diggs had 6 receptions for 77 yards and a touchdown. And on defense, Will Anderson Jr. had 3 sacks, and as a team they had 4 sacks and 2 interceptions. Then for the Packers, they beat the Cardinals 34-13. In that game, Jordan Love went 22 of 32, 258 yards, 4 touchdowns, and an interception. Now on the season, he has 1,100 yards, 12 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Then Josh Jacobs had 62 yards running, and Christian Watson had 3 receptions for 68 yards and a touchdown. And for the first game this season, Xavier McKinney did not have an interception. This is going to be a very close game. The Texans do have the better defense, but the Packers still have a great one. But I think it's just going to come down to the Packers are at home, so I have them winning. Then we have the 3-2 Eagles versus the 2-4 Giants. In the Eagles' win over the Browns, Jalen Hurts had 264 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Browns held Saquon Barkley just to 47 yards rushing, and in A.J. Brown's return from missing the last 4 weeks, he had 6 receptions for 116 yards and a touchdown. Then in the Giants' loss over the Bengals, Daniel Jones went 22 of 41, 205 yards and an interception, while also having 56 yards rushing, and Darius Slayton had 6 receptions for 57 yards. The Giants will be without Kayvon Thibodeau again, and he's on the IR, and I have the Eagles winning. Then we have the 4-1 Lions versus the 5-0 Vikings, and this is a huge divisional game. But in the NFC North, all 4 teams have 4 or more wins. For the Lions, they beat the Cowboys 47-9. Jared Goff went 18 of 25, 315 yards and 3 touchdowns. David Montgomery had 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs had 83 yards rushing, and Jamison Williams had 3 receptions for 76 yards and a touchdown. And on defense, they had 4 sacks and 3 interceptions, but they lost Aiden Hutchinson for the season on a play where he had a sack, but he fractured his tibia and fibula. Then for the Vikings, they're coming off their bye week, and in their last game, they beat the Jets 23-17 in London. This should also be a very close game. With Aiden Hutchinson out and how good the Vikings defense is, I have the Vikings winning. Then we have the 3-3 Seahawks versus the 4-2 Falcons. The Seahawks lost 36-24 against the 49ers on Thursday Night Football, and they have now lost 3 games in a row. Geno Smith went 30 of 52, 312 yards, a touchdown and 2 interceptions. Kenneth Walker had 32 yards and a touchdown, and Tyler Lockett had 4 receptions for 65 yards and a touchdown. Then for the Falcons, they won 38-20 against the Panthers. In that game, Kirk Cousins had 225 yards and a touchdown, and they dominated on the ground, with Tyler Algier having 105 yards and a touchdown, and Bijan Robinson having 95 yards and 2 touchdowns. Then Drake London had 6 receptions for 74 yards and a touchdown, and the Falcons have also won 3 games in a row. They're at home this game, and they're 2-2 in home games, but I still think they're going to win. Then we have the 2-3 Dolphins versus the 3-3 Colts. The Dolphins are coming off their bye week, and in their last game in week 5, they beat the Patriots 15-10. Then for the Colts, in their win versus the Titans, Joe Flacco had 189 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception, and now on the season, in 3 games, he has 700 yards, 7 touchdowns, and an interception. But in this game, Anthony Richardson's going to be starting. That offense has looked great with Joe Flacco in there, but Anthony Richardson has thrown 6 interceptions on the season. And with the Dolphins coming off their bye week, that gave Tyler Huntley a lot more time to get used to throwing to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So I have the Dolphins winning. Then we have the 1-5 Panthers versus the 2-4 Commanders. In the Panthers' loss against the Falcons, this was actually a pretty close game in the first half, being down 22-17 at halftime. Then at the end of the third quarter, they were down by only 8, but in the fourth quarter, they gave up 10 unanswered points. In this game, Andy Dalton went 26 of 38, 221 yards, 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Then Chuba Hubbard had 92 yards rushing, and Deontay Johnson had 6 receptions for 78 yards and a touchdown. Then for the Commanders, they lost 30-23 against the Ravens, and Jaden Daniels had another great game, going 24 of 35, 269 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and 22 yards rushing. And that was their biggest problem in this game. They didn't have any running game. They had 18 carries for 52 yards as a team, and Zach Ertz led them with 4 receptions for 68 yards, and Terry McLaurin had had 2 receiving touchdowns. But their best defensive tackle, Jonathan Allen, will be out for this next game. But I still have the Commanders winning. Then we have the 2-4 Raiders versus the 1-4 Rams. The Raiders lost 32-13 against the Steelers. In this game, Aiden O'Connell went 27-40, 227 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Brock Bowers had a great game with 9 receptions for 71 yards, and he's now their leading receiver on the season, with 37 receptions, 380 yards, and a touchdown. Then for the Rams, they're coming off their bye week, and in their last game, in Week 5, they lost 24-19 against the Packers. Cooper Kupp has been upgraded to questionable for this game, and I think if he plays, the Rams are definitely going to win. But even if he doesn't play, the Raiders last week gave up 180 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground, and the Rams still have a great running back with Kyren Williams. So I have the Rams winning. Then we had the 5-0 Chiefs versus the 3-3 49ers. The Chiefs are coming off their bye week, and in their last game, they won 26-13 against the Saints. Then for the 49ers, they won 36-24 against the Seahawks on Thursday Night Football. Brock Purdy went 18 of 28, 255 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And they had a huge run game in this one, with 228 yards and a touchdown as a team. But Jordan Mason got injured in this game and is questionable for this week. Then Deebo Samuel had 3 receptions for 102 yards and a touchdown, and George Kittle had 2 receiving touchdowns as well. I think this is going to be another very close game. It's a rematch of the last Super Bowl, and I have the Chiefs winning. Then on Sunday Night Football, we have the 2-4 Jets versus the 4-2 Steelers. The Jets had a very close loss, 23-20 against the Bills on Monday Night Football, and they could have easily won this game, but their kicker, Greg Zuerlein, missed 2 field goals. But Aaron Rodgers had 294 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Then Breece Hall had a big game with 113 yards running and 5 receptions for 56 yards. Then Allen Lazard had 6 receptions for 114 yards and a touchdown, and Garrett Wilson had 107 yards and a touchdown. And they traded for Devontae Adams. Then in the Steelers' win over the Raiders, Justin Fields had 145 yards and 59 yards and 2 touchdowns running, and Najee Harris had 106 yards and a touchdown. The Jets have now had a full game under their belt with their new head coach, and I have the Jets winning. Then on Monday Night Football, there's again 2 games. The first game is the 4-2 Ravens versus the 4-2 Buccaneers. In the Ravens' win over the Commanders, Lamar Jackson went 20 of 26, 323 yards, a touchdown, and an interception, and had 40 yards rushing. And now in the season, he has 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, while also having 400 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. And he's looking like he's going to win his 3rd MVP this season. But Derrick Henry also had 130 yards and 2 touchdowns rushing. And now in the season, he has 700 yards rushing, 8 rushing touchdowns, while also having a receiving touchdown. And he's nearly on pace for another 2,000-yard season. Then for the Buccaneers, in their big win over the Saints, Baker Mayfield had 325 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions, and now has 15 touchdowns on the season. Then Sean Tucker had a great game with 136 yards and a touchdown, while also having 56 yards receiving and a touchdown. And Chris Godwin led them in receiving with 11 receptions for 125 yards and 2 touchdowns. And on defense, they had 5 sacks and 2 interceptions. And in Baker Mayfield's career, he is 3-6 versus the Ravens. Both of these teams have a great offense and a great defense, and this could be a very high-scoring game. But I still think the Ravens are going to win. Then finally, the 3-2 Chargers versus the 2-4 Cardinals. In the Chargers' win over the Broncos, Justin Herbert had 237 yards and a touchdown, and J.K. Dobbins had 96 yards and a touchdown rushing. And for the Cardinals, in their loss against Green Bay, Kyler Murray had 214 yards and a touchdown. Trey McBride led them in receiving with 8 receptions for 96 yards. But as a team, they had 23 carries for just 89 yards rushing. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is questionable for this game with a concussion, so I have the Chargers winning. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Goodbye.